The Galactic Overlords, in their infinite and unquestionable wisdom, had seen fit to execute a child today. A human child specifically because apparently humanity had a bad habit of being defiant in the face of their benevolent oppression. Elias, all of 10 years old, sat in the center of the grand tribunal hall with his tiny hands tied behind his back. His crime? Well, that depended on which bureaucratic alien you asked. One record said he had stolen a nutrient ration from a market stall. Another insisted he had spoken blasphemy against the High Overlord's many-tentacled magnificence. A particularly creative report suggested he had single-handedly conspired to destabilize the Galactic Order with his big, round, rebellious eyes. The truth? He had tripped while running and knocked over a High Commander's beverage. The commander, drenched in an unidentifiable green sludge that smelled of burning rubber and sadness, had immediately called for Elias's execution. The trial itself was a joke. No defense, no deliberation, just a lot of squabbling over the most entertaining way to kill the boy. The insectoid overlords in attendance debated whether vaporization, public evisceration, or being fed to a genetically modified worm beast would send a clearer message to the humans. The judges, 3 bloated amphibious creatures perched atop a floating dais, argued in croaking voices about the efficiency of each method. Elias, for his part, didn't cry. He learned long ago that crying never made the aliens change their minds. Instead, he glanced around at the spectators, silent, fearful humans packed into the viewing platforms, their expressions a mixture of helplessness and dread. And then there was Lucian, his godfather, seated in the farthest row. Lucian was a quiet man, tall, broad-shouldered, and always watching. He was the kind of man people instinctively avoided, not because he was cruel, but because there was something unsettling about him. A presence, a weight to the way he carried himself. His expression never changed. Right now, it was blank as ever. Elias might have thought his godfather felt nothing, if not for the fact that Lucian's hands, normally steady as stone, were clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The lead judge finally settled the debate by waving a webbed hand. Enough deliberation. The human will be executed via plasma incineration. It is fast, clean, and reduces waste. One of the guards, a hulking reptilian brute with scales the color of bruised flesh, grabbed Elias by the arm and dragged him forward. The plasma cannon, a massive cylindrical device mounted at the center of the room, hummed to life. The executioner, a bored-looking cephalopod with 2 mini eyes, adjusted the settings with a casual flick of its tendrils. Elias exhaled slowly. He wasn't ready to die, but then no one ever was. Lucian did not move, did not blink. He simply watched, a still, silent thing in a room filled with cowards and monsters. The executioner turned. Any last words, human? Elias considered. He had plenty, but none of them would matter. Still, he glanced once more at Lucian, at the single-minute shake of his godfather's head. Strange. Not a denial, not a command. Just a warning. Elias smiled. Then, in a voice steady and sure, he said, "You really shouldn't have spilled your own drink." The chamber erupted in outrage. The lead judge slapped the podium with a webbed limb. "Begin the incineration immediately." The executioner sighed. No appreciation for dramatic flair, and pressed the activation rune. The cannon whined, a bright, violent glow surging in its core. There was a blinding flash, a sound like 1,000 screams trapped in metal. And then, just like that, Elias was gone, reduced to ash. Silence. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the still-charged cannon and the murmurs of alien voices. The humans in the audience lowered their heads, already mourning, already swallowing the rage they could never act upon. The overlords, satisfied, prepared to move on to their next order of business. And then finally Lucian moved. It was subtle, a slow, deliberate act, uncrossing his arms, rolling his shoulders, rising to his feet. A few nearby aliens turned confused. Why was this human standing? Lucian inhaled once. The air was thick with the scent of burning, of ozone, of scorched flesh. His fingers twitched. His jaw ached. His vision was sharp, too sharp. The guard stepped forward, their hands drifting toward their weapons. Lucian exhaled, and then he smiled. Not a pleasant smile, not the kind meant to reassure or comfort. No, this was the kind of smile that made people, creatures, monsters, rulers, remember what it was to be prey. The reptilian guard closest to him hesitated. "Sit down, human." Lucian didn't. The executioner tilted its bulbous head. "You will be removed if you." Lucian tilted his head back and let out a low, rumbling chuckle. Not forced, not performed, just the genuine, uncontrollable amusement of someone who had spent too long holding something back and had finally decided to let it go. "Ah," he murmured, rolling his neck until his bones popped. "I was going to wait. Really, I was—" The nearest guards reacted, stepping closer, plasma rifles raised. Lucian's shoulders trembled, not in fear, not in anger, but in anticipation. The lead judge narrowed its enormous, amphibious eyes. "Human, you will control yourself? Or we will—" Lucian laughed. The guards didn't get the chance to fire, because Lucian was already moving, because the air was thick with the scent of burning, because something old, something hungry, had just decided that today the Galactic Overlords had made a very, very unfortunate mistake. The first guard never saw it coming. One moment, he was reaching for his communicator, and the next, Lucian's hand was wrapped around his throat, lifting him off the ground as though he weighed nothing at all. The reptilian's scaled feet scrabbled against the air, his claws grasping at Lucian's wrist in mounting panic. "GHK, release." Lucian did, with enthusiasm. The unfortunate guard sailed across the execution chamber, hit a marble pillar with a deeply satisfying crack, and slumped to the ground in a boneless heap. For one perfect moment, absolute silence filled the room. Aliens of every species, amphibians, insects, cephalopods, gawked at the human who had just turned a 200-pound guard into a living projectile. Lucian rolled his shoulders. "That's one." Then, of course, all hell broke loose. The remaining guards lunged, plasma rifles humming as they snapped into position. The executioner, who had just been adjusting the plasma cannon for the next scheduled incineration, shrieked and flung itself behind the console. Spectators scrambled toward the exits, humans and aliens alike stampeding over one another in blind panic. Lucian let out a slow breath. Then his bones shifted. The pain was a familiar thing. The snapping of ribs expanding, the thickening of muscle, the lengthening of claws and fangs. He welcomed it like an old friend. His suit shredded first, seams bursting apart as his spine stretched, as his hands twisted into something more suited for tearing than holding. Dark fur rippled along his arms. His jaw cracked, reshaped, elongated into something built for biting. The nearest guard, an insectoid with too many limbs and not nearly enough common sense, skittered forward and fired. The plasma bolt seared through the space where Lucian's head had been a half-second ago. Unfortunately for the bug, Lucian had already moved. A blur of motion, a flash of fangs. The insectoid didn't even have time to scream. One swipe, one wet crunch, and its exoskeleton caved in like an overripe fruit. That was two. The rest of the guards hesitated, which was fair. After all, the official report said that humans were weak, pathetic, barely more than a nuisance, only good for mining raw materials and paying planetary taxes. The report said nothing about this. Lucian turned his glowing amber eyes toward the next target, licking blood from his fangs. "Come on, boys," he said, voice half-growl. "I'm just getting warmed up." The execution hall became a battleground. The guards who weren't currently rethinking their life choices opened fire. Plasma rounds scorched the air, filling the chamber with the acrid scent of burning stone and superheated metal. Lucian moved fast, too fast for something his size. He twisted, dodged, and weaved through the volley of energy blasts, claws carving through armor and flesh alike. He grabbed one of the reptilian guards by the arm, twisted, and was rewarded with a sickening pop as the limb dislocated. The alien shrieked, right up until Lucian slammed his skull into the floor. 3. Something sharp bit into his side. One of the smarter guards had managed to land a shot. A burning pain flared through his ribs, but it was distant, already dulling as his body repaired itself with unnatural speed. Lucian bared his teeth. "Oh, you shouldn't have done that." The offending guard immediately dropped his rifle and sprinted in the opposite direction. Lucian let him go, not because he was feeling merciful. No, he was feeling hungry, but because he was busy dodging an incoming energy blade. The lead judge had abandoned his lofty perch, gliding down with surprising speed, a long, crackling energy saber humming in his webbed grip. "Cease this madness at once, human." Lucian snorted. "Do I look like a human to you?" The judge hesitated. Lucian lunged. The two collided in a blur of motion, energy blades slicing through the air as Lucian's claws lashed out. Sparks flew as claw met plasma, the force of their blows shaking the chamber. The judge was faster than the others. A warrior, not just another fat bureaucrat in a robe. But Lucian had fought worse. He ducked beneath a sweeping arc, twisted behind the judge, and clamped his jaws around the alien's shoulder. The taste was foul. Amphibians always were, but the judge's gurgling scream made up for it. Lucian wrenched his head back, and something ripped. 4. The rest of the tribunal panicked. One of them flailed toward the nearest intercom. "Emergency! Emergency! Code!" Lucian leapt. The transmission cut off with a wet crunch. 5. The remaining aliens abandoned all pretense of authority. There was no more posturing, no more speeches about the power of the Galactic Order. No. Now they ran. Lucian exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders, feeling the blood drip from his claws. A soft whimper caught his ear. He turned. A human woman, one of the spectators, was curled against the wall, arms wrapped tightly around a boy no older than Elias had been. "Ah!" Lucian sighed, lifting a clawed hand to his face and rubbing his temple. "Right?" he muttered. "Scary monster. I keep forgetting that part." He forced himself to stand straighter, to retract the claws slightly, to soften just a bit. Not much. Just enough. The woman flinched as he took a step forward. Please don't." Lucian blinked, then snorted. "Lady, really? I just spent the last 5 minutes exclusively murdering aliens. Do I look like I'm here for you?" She hesitated. Then, cautiously, she lifted her gaze. Lucian sighed, crouching down so he was closer to the boy's level. "Listen, kid," he said, voice gruff but not unkind. "I just ruined a lot of very important people's day, which means they're about to get real nasty real fast. You need to get somewhere safe." The boy's eyes were huge. "ARU," he swallowed. "Are you going to eat them all?" Lucian considered. "Probably not all of them." The boy stared. Then, unexpectedly, he giggled. Lucian huffed a laugh himself, shaking his head. "Yeah, all right. That's enough bonding. You two go. Now." The woman didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed the boy's hand and bolted toward the exit. Lucian exhaled, shaking out his fur. Then he turned toward the far side of the chamber, where a squad of heavily armored enforcers had just burst through the doors, weapons primed and ready. The lead enforcer took one look at the carnage, at the shredded bodies, at the blood-stained werewolf standing amid the wreckage of the tribunal, and hesitated. Lucian bared his teeth. "Gentlemen," he rumbled, stretching his claws. "Shall we continue?" The enforcers hesitated, which was smart. Unfortunately for them, hesitation wasn't a survival trait when facing an enraged werewolf. Lucian didn't wait for them to make a decision. He launched himself forward, crossing the distance between them in a single, predatory leap. The first enforcer barely had time to let out a startled chirp before Lucian's claws carved through his armor like wet paper. He hit the ground in 2 distinct pieces. That seemed to be enough motivation for the rest. They opened fire. Plasma bolts filled the air, searing bright trails across the chamber. Some found their mark, burning through fur and flesh, but Lucian had long since stopped caring about pain. He moved like smoke, twisting through the hail of gunfire, striking fast and hard. One guard tried to fall back, fumbling for his communicator. Lucian relieved him of that burden by sinking his fangs into his throat. A high-pitched alarm blared through the execution hall. The Galactic Order had finally caught on that something bad was happening. Took them long enough. Lucian wiped a hand across his bloody mouth and grinned. "That's right, you bureaucratic parasites," he muttered. "Time to wake up." Somewhere in the chaos, a human rebel had gotten his hands on an alien rifle and decided now was as good a time as any to start shooting. His aim was awful, but Lucian appreciated the enthusiasm. The other humans in the audience, previously frozen in fear, began to move. It started as a ripple. One rebel fired. Another grabbed a fallen alien's weapon. Someone hurled a chair at a retreating enforcer. And then, just like that, the dam broke. Humans poured from the stands, seizing their moment, striking out against their oppressors. The aliens who had once held absolute control over this world suddenly found themselves being torn apart, not by warships or orbital bombardments, but by the very people they had deemed too weak to fight back. Lucian let out a sharp bark of laughter. Asterisk that's asterisk more like it. Then the ceiling exploded. A warship, one of the Galactic Order's elite vessels, hovered above the tribunal, its cannons glowing ominously. A mechanical voice boomed through unseen speakers. Cease this insurrection. Surrender the beast. Compliance will be met with mercy. Lucian tilted his head. Ah, that's new. The warship fired. The blast tore through the chamber, sending bodies flying. Lucian hit the ground hard, dust and rubble crashing around him. His ears rang. His vision blurred. Something was broken, probably several somethings. Didn't matter. He forced himself to his feet. The humans who hadn't been vaporized outright were still fighting. He could hear them, shouts of defiance, the crackle of stolen energy weapons, the wet sounds of revenge being carried out with whatever was on hand. Good. Lucian's eyes snapped back to the warship. If the Order thought they could wipe this rebellion out with a single well-placed explosion, they were about to be very disappointed. He took a step forward, then froze. A new scent. Something old. Something that did not belong to the Galactic Order. Lucian turned slowly, hackles rising. At the far end of the ruined chamber, standing untouched by fire and blood, was a figure wrapped in dark robes. Not an alien. Not human, either. Something else. The figure lifted its head. A hood fell back, revealing a face that was almost, but not quite, human. Eyes too bright. Skin too smooth. A presence that made the air hum with something Lucian's instincts recognized as danger. Lucian narrowed his eyes. You're not with them. The figure smiled. No. Lucian waited. When no further explanation came, he let out a slow breath. See, that's not going to work for me. I just murder my way through an entire tribunal. My patience for cryptic nonsense is really low right now. The figure chuckled. It was not a reassuring sound. The Galactic Order believes they control this sector, it said. They are mistaken. Their rule is temporary. Lucian's claws flexed. He didn't like this. He didn't like this at all. And you are? A witness? The figure gestured toward the battlefield, where humans were still tearing through their former captors. You have done something remarkable here, Werewolf. You have reminded them what they are. Lucian snorted. And what's that? The figure's smile widened. Hunters. Lucian didn't have time for whatever this was. He had a warship to destroy, a rebellion to lead, and very little patience left. He turned, ready to launch himself at the nearest piece of military hardware. The figure's voice stopped him cold. Your kind was never meant to bow, Lucian. Lucian's breath hitched, not because of the words, but because of the name. He turned back sharply. The figure was gone. Lucian clenched his jaw, irritation sparking hotter than the fire still raging around him. I hate creepy cryptic nonsense. Then he moved. The warship had landed troops. Elite enforcers in black armor stormed the ruins of the tribunal, weapons raised, moving in perfect formation. Lucian cracked his neck. These ones, at least, were predictable. He met them head-on. The first soldier lunged. Lucian caught him mid-strike, twisted, and used the poor bastard as a makeshift club against his comrades. A plasma blade seared across his ribs. He ignored it. A pulse grenade detonated too close, sending him skidding backward. He snarled and kept going. The enforcers were well-trained. They were disciplined. They were using top-tier military strategy. Didn't matter. Lucian was not an army. He was not a soldier. He was a predator, and he fought like one. By the time the last enforcer fell, The humans had pushed the remaining aliens out of the tribunal. The rebellion had begun. Lucian stood amid the wreckage, blood dripping from his claws, breath ragged but steady. He glanced up. The warship still loomed overhead. One thing left to do then. Lucian grinned, baring bloody fangs. He crouched and leapt.